don't want what the other folks have. 10 rules for happy living. Now, go back with me again to the setting. God sends these brothers Moses and Aaron into Egypt. The children of Israel down in Egypt are lying just to get by. In order to feed your family, you had to work 7 days a week, and that certainly included the Saturday Sabbath. If you're going to get along with the Pharaoh, you had to become involved in the worship of the golden calf, and that included sexual immorality. To feed the kids, you had to steal a little extra. Now, God might have said, Moses, Aaron, go on down in there, go on down to Egypt, confront the Pharaoh, and once you've straightened things out with him and told him how it's going to be, then I want you to go to my children, Israel, and tell them that as soon as they straighten up, as soon as they get their lives in order, as soon as they stop all of this junk, stop lying and cheating, committing adultery, then I'm going to save you. Then I'll lead you out. Is that the way God operated? No. He led them out, and again I say, out into the safety of the Sinai Peninsula. Now he restates his 10 rules for happy living, and it is in this context. God says, I have saved you. We just read that. I am the Lord thy God that has taken you by the hand and brought you out of Egypt. Therefore then, you don't have to lie. You don't have to take my name in vain. You don't have to steal. You don't have to commit adultery. I've saved you from all of that. You don't have to live like animals any longer. Your heads were made to wear crowns. You're the children of royalty, and now you may live like royals as well. The 10 commandments of God become a wonderful promise of God that we don't have to live like animals any longer. I've saved you from that. But we go back now to 2 Timothy, and we find in the last days, folks in a complete disregard of God's 10 rules for happy living. And the chaos is going to follow. And that's what we're seeing, by the way, isn't it? So it says that men are going to be covetous. Now, in God's 10 commandment law, it is rules for happy living. He said, thou shalt not covet. They're disregarding that commandment, certainly. And then it goes on to say that they're going to be boasters and blasphemers. I can remember a time when in educated circles, you rarely ever heard even a slang word. And when men, when they missed with a hammer and mashed their thumb, might say, oh, that hurts. Wow. As Bob Dylan said, the times, man, they're changing. I've mentioned on prior occasions that Lyle, for 6 years and parts of 3 more, worked in the logging camps in eastern Oregon. And for a long while, I thought the loggers had the most vile language that was possible in any segment of society. Words I'd never heard before, I learned from the loggers. And then I went over to the coastal area to work, and I found there in the ports some sailors. And the sailors, I guess, had been around the world, and they knew some words the loggers didn't know. I guess they didn't know. I'd never heard them from loggers. And then I moved up the seaboard, and I worked where there were lots of longshoremen. And the longshoremen must have taught the sailors some things and could teach them some more. There were words they knew that the sailors, and expressions and jokes. And I said, these must be the most vile men, the most rotten minds and words and all of the rest. But you know what, my dears? In just about 10 years, we've come to a point where the women speak in the same language. And somehow it's chic now, you know. It's cute. We were in a restaurant, Peggy and I, not so very long ago. And 3 ladies were doing lunch, you know. And you didn't have to eavesdrop. I mean, they were speaking loudly enough for anyone to hear. And the language they were using was from the gutter. Really, truly it was. Filthy, rotten language. Chick. I was watching a television show. There was a certain award-winning actress being interviewed. And I paused there for just a little bit because I thought that this lady, I'd seen her in a thing or two just briefly. And I thought, she's talented. Very talented. And the interviewer asked this lady, tell us now, what is the word that you least like to hear? And she said, can't. I thought, well, that makes sense, you know. I like a positive attitude. And then the interviewer said, would you please tell us the word that you like best? Your favorite word, the one that you enjoy saying. Oh, she said, I don't believe that I could say it here. Go ahead, he said, say it. And it was 4 letters beginning with F, and I don't have to say it for you, do I? Now, I'm going to tell you folks what it means when men, women, kids, anybody uses that kind of language. What you're saying, what you're exposing is this. You're saying to the world, I am really quite stupid, almost illiterate. Look at me, I am so dumb that I don't have vocabulary enough to express myself without these rotten little profanities. Look how ignorant I am. But the Bible says that in the last day, they're going to be like that, blasphemers. And then it goes on to talk about being disobedient to parents. And we read the stories now of the wild kids. Pastor told me this morning about a lady that he had the prayer with, concerned about her family, particularly one member in the family, out of hand, in trouble at school, in trouble here, in trouble there. I was going up the coast the other day on a ferry, in fact, and I saw along the shore a sign that I think I shall never forget. It said, someday we've come to when the dogs go to obedience school and the kids run wild. And so we read these stories about the teenagers that are out of hand, and we say, oh yeah, those rotten kids. Look at what we've come to, these filthy, rotten kids. But it's not only the children who are disobedient to parents. Are you keeping up with the stories of the old folks? Those that are suffering now with senility, dementia. And the family doesn't have enough money to put them in the care home. And so the kids have to take them. It's either that or they live on the street. And so they take in dad or mother. And it's a chore. Boy, it's a chore. And if I have one prayer, it's this: dear God, don't let me live to be senile. It's the worst thing that I can imagine, to have a shell of a body that just keeps going, like that little rabbit, just keeps going and going and going, and nothing in your head. It's a terrible thing. And pretty soon Dad forgets what the bathroom is about. And it's one mess after another, after another, after another. And you say, Dad, you stay out of the kitchen. I'm telling you, you stay out of the kitchen. And you tie him up. But he gets loose. And he goes in the kitchen and cooks himself something and leaves the pots on the stove and leaves the stove on high. And before long, there is a fire. And story after story after story now, these stories are coming to us about adults, those that are 55, 60 years of age, who put dad or mother in the bathtub. They've had all they can stand, and they're almost out of their minds. And so they turn the tap on full, and it's the hot water tap, and they scald them to death in the bathtub or smother them with their feather pillow. Disobedient to parents, it said in the last day. They're going to be unthankful and unholy. And then in verse 3 it says they're going to be without a natural affection. Now, my dears, what is being spoken of here is homosexuality and lesbianism. And that's very clear. And within the bonds of matrimony, it's a natural thing for a man to have a sexual affection and attraction to his wife and vice versa. But God is talking about unnatural affection. I know that we don't understand all about it yet, and I don't have any background in science. And I know about the extra genes from this side or that. But I think, folk, it's time we stop blaming God. It's time we stop blaming God. I was invited to a large ministerial association meeting in Washington, D.C. Thought leaders and church leaders from all of the greater Washington area were invited to hear a certain young pastor by name of Roy Burchard speak. Roy Burchard began by saying something to this effect. Those who know me know, and now all of you shall know, that I am a practicing homosexual. I am not promiscuous. I have a lover. He's in New York City. One weekend I fly to be with him. The next he comes down to be with me. He said, along with that, I am pastor of a church and leader of an organization called Gays on the Hill for the promotion of gay and lesbian rights. He said, it dawned upon me quite a while back that I had nothing to be ashamed of. I had no reason to hide and stay in a closet, for God made me what I am. And now he asked, are there any questions? And a little Catholic priest, God bless his heart for the courage that he found. And he stood up and he said, I have one question, Mr. Burchard. And he didn't refer to him as reverend or pastor. I have a question, Mr. Burchard. In light of the clear teaching in God's Word against lesbianism and homosexuality, how do you understand your ordination to the gospel ministry? I mean, how do you see your place as a preacher? And I shall never, never forget the answer. It was a classic. I'd heard this answer given by folks who wanted to eat anything they wanted to eat, or drink anything they wanted to drink, or dress in any way that they wanted to dress, or keep a commandment, or fail to keep a commandment. But I'd never as yet heard it in this context. And here's what Roy Burchard said. Ladies and gentlemen, the clear teaching against lesbianism and homosexuality is to be found in the Old Testament. Now, he said, I'm sure that none of you here, none of you Christians here, want to be bound by that Old Testament law. And by now this preacher had enjoyed all he could stand. And I stood to my feet and opened my Bible to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and I began to read, God shall not allow in his kingdom this one or this one or this one, or malakoi, which is translated effeminate. That means homosexual and lesbianism. It says they're not going to go into God's kingdom when they're living like that. Can a homosexual or lesbian go into God's kingdom? Yes. In the same way a robber can go into God's kingdom. Can a man who continues to rob until the day that Jesus comes go into the kingdom? No. No. Can one who's inclined to be a homosexual live a celibate life and go into God's kingdom? Yes.